Dungeons and Dragons, and what the heck does that have to do with Eurorack modules? I'm gonna assume that most of you guys know what Dungeons and Dragons is, but for those of you guys that don't, Dungeons and Dragons essentially is a mathematical system invented by a fellow named Gary Gygax for tabletop gaming, more or less. I'm not gonna get into why people get into it, other than people do. And when they do, some go like all in. It's incredibly time consuming with gaming sessions or campaigns that can literally last years. Sound familiar? Because you could swap the words Dungeons and Dragons and insert the words Eurorack modules and it would equally make sense. There's just something magical about Eurorack modules that appeal to us synth gearheads that gets us to kind of lose our minds and our wallets. Eurorack modules can also incite some strong and divisive opinions as well. But make no mistake, Dungeons and Dragons, despite its humble and nerdy beginning, its influence is massive. Its impact over Hollywood, film, TV, and of course, literally all modern video games. I'm not a synth historian, but it's safe to say that Eurorack has its roots in Dr. Bob Moog's work and all vintage synthesizers that came before it. And clearly, the Eurorack ecosystem is the modern iteration of all good and perhaps not so good aspects of synthesis. It represents this vast treasure trove of synthesis history and crazy modern twists and takes on that rich history. From Moog 1 to the DX7, the Juno 106, samplers, sequencers, drum machines, convolution reverbs, and granular synthesis, I mean, you name it. To learn and experiment with Eurorack modules is to interact literally with history. If you're a Hollywood screenwriter or a video game designer, it would do well for you to learn as much as you can about Dungeons and Dragons. And for us, even me, as a classically trained musician and a composer, it has served me well to learn as much as I can about Eurorack modules. I did this silly thing where I ended up having two skiffs, each with modules from like one manufacturer. You can do things like this with Eurorack modules. This is the mutable instruments skiff where all the modules are from mutable instruments, except the one used. And this skiff is from Intellijel where all the modules are from Intellijel. I'm currently in the process of comparing the two companies' sound, design philosophy, and impact they've made in the Eurorack ecosystem as a whole. But for today, I want to focus on the Shapeshifter from Intellijel, which feels appropriate because the module kind of sounds like it's something out of Dungeons and Dragons. The module really lives up to the name Shapeshifter because it kind of can sound and morph into anything with its range of tones and modulations. In fact, you can tell how this module was influenced by the modules that came before it and how potentially the Shapeshifter might have influenced modules that are popular today, since the Shapeshifter is about a decade old. Now, for those of you who don't know, the Shapeshifter is a dual digital voltage oscillator with an analog wavefolder. But it's so much more. It's deep and frankly a little awkward when it comes to the menu and the accessibility. I've noticed definite differences between today's modular design trends versus, say, the Shapeshifter. From mellow hushed tones to like insane, stabby, edgy, almost violent sounds, its expressive range is quite impressive. Listen as you start to detune this thing or turn the frequency modulator knob. Or hear as you go through the wavetable. And this is really key. Once you sort of get over the frustration hump, the module starts to educate you as to how synthesis works. and sometimes painfully at a super fundamental level. Intellijel modules like the Shapeshifter at heart feels like it's designed to be more of a toolbox with user-friendliness as kind of an afterthought. I found that some modules, especially older ones, they almost give you like the colors to paint, but it doesn't give you like presets or brush strokes or clip arts as a guide. This is a tough one for manufacturers, I think, because they want to reach as wide selling audience as possible, which means they're under pressure to make presets and UIs more simpler and more accessible. And to be fair, the Shapeshifter does come with some presets, but this also means sacrificing depth and complexity and openness. Some of the best Eurorack modules are designed exactly this way. Make Noises Maths is a good example of kind of like hard to figure out what this actually does, but it keeps on giving. Now, Shapeshifter does have presets, but it's really best when you start with like a blank, clean slate and take it from there. I mean, that's why Eurorack modules have patch cables, right? We're supposed to patch sounds and not like crutch off presets. It's also fragile and volatile. There's no save in the best sense, like an unrecorded live performance that only existed briefly for those who were there to hear it. My best experiences with modules, especially ones like the Shapeshifter, with a relatively difficult learning curve, is the beauty of what and how certain synthesis concepts and applications actually work under the hood and experiencing it. And it's not about how the module sounds at any particular moment. That's probably why newcomers, including myself, at first thought, boy, modular music sounds pretty repetitive, mostly beeps and bloops for like hours on end. It sounds crazy to say it, but the modular experience sometimes is not about the way it sounds, but actually how it was made to sound that way. So in this case, the old adage of it doesn't matter as long as it sounds good actually doesn't apply. With the safe confines of the Eurorack modular system, we can just geek out without any fear of criticism. And again, how it sounds is almost like beside the point while learning. Experimenting with certain functions to influence the oscillator is something to be filed away, to be applied more broadly in future music production, perhaps. So the real creative mental breakthrough with Eurorack modules was to not worry about results, but rather just learn and absorb. It's about feeding that creative golden goose that in the future will lay those golden eggs. All of this can apply probably to other tools in the toolbox. I mean, it doesn't really have to be Eurorack modules, but I'll argue at least for hardware over software tools, because I think hardware, in my opinion, has like unique advantages when it comes to tactile engagement and focus. And let's face it, there's something just magical about customizing and collecting modules. But it's possible to do this with standalone synths like Novation's Peak, or one of my favorites, the ASM Hydrasynth, boxes that have presets, but it's also got that depth that you can really get your teeth into. My advice is not to get too discouraged the moment when a little something is confusing or frustrating. I think there's a difference between a poorly designed product versus a product that is deep and requires your attention. Even if the product is a bit obtuse, there are times for when tools require frictionless, optimized production where time is money and you gotta move fast. Modular synthesis is not that. It's where you take time out to feed your creative soul. I've been wrestling with my conflicted love-hate relationship with Eurorack modules, but there's been this one big breakthrough. The best version of using Eurorack modules for me right now is not building fancy patches or turning and twisting knobs and trying to come up with something. No, it's simply setting aside a Sunday afternoon with a nice hot cup of tea, turn off the phone, grab my headphones, crack open that PDF manual, and feed my golden goose.